Hi people, it's Archivist here with a very specific World of Warcraft topic, and that is, was vanilla WoW better than what we have now? And the answer to this question is not simply yes or no, because in some ways the game has gotten worse, and in other ways it has undeniably improved. It isn't a straightforward answer, so I think it's quite good to consider both sides of the argument. So first of all, from a gameplay perspective and a quality perspective, I would certainly say the game has gotten better. Storytelling has certainly evolved, there's far more dynamic quests, there's more cutscenes, far more ways for the game to actually tell stories and actually tell them in a more compelling way. And I think the stories themselves are more interesting. I think vanilla WoW had some really awesome high-end stories, but a lot of the earlier stuff was a little mundane and you often didn't know why you were doing what you were doing. And also I think it's fair to say, and this is fairly undeniable, the quality has just generally improved. So I'm speaking to things like graphics, streamlining. And I think the streamlining of World of Warcraft is something that some players appreciate, while others absolutely hate. And this really did happen in the transition from Lich King to Cataclysm. The game became far more approachable, you might even say more casual, and by that I mean you can just play the game, it's far more easy to just go through, there are far less areas where you can get stuck. I think that's a very important point. I remember in Vanilla and BC there were points in the leveling process between 1 and 60 where I was just stuck, or there were just no more quests to do, or a dungeon was particularly challenging, I just couldn't do it. And that really doesn't happen now during the leveling process. Sure, you're halted when you're going through endgame content, but during the actual leveling process, can you ever say there was a point where you are stuck, where you can no longer progress? I bet you can't say that anymore. Certainly since Cataclysm, the game has become very straightforward. And I wouldn't necessarily say that is a bad thing, however there is, and I think it all comes down to one particular device that really changed the nature of the game, in some ways for the better, and in some ways for the worse, and that is the looking for dungeon tool. Now, if you've been playing the game since Cataclysm but not before, all you'll know is LFD, and that's just how the game is. But before that, you had to go into general chat or your guild and ask people if they want to do a dungeon. And that would often take a very long time. Sometimes I remember up to an hour or even longer, because getting tanks was an absolute nightmare. And you did have to stay on standby because you weren't instantly teleported to the dungeon. You had to actually go to the instance portal. And it's crazy to think that that's a whole part of the game that's gone now. And although that was extremely inconvenient and almost unthinkable now, because it was you had to go so out of the way to do it, it did create a sense of obligation with the people you were running the dungeon with. Because now when you go into dungeons, they are completely random people, and a lot of the time they're not even on your server. And to be honest, I think of them as bots, not even real players. I think of my guildies as real players because you get a sense of their personality, you can talk to them. But with random people in looking for dungeon, you have no sense of them as other people. To be perfectly honest, Blizzard could change dungeons into a single player system where you just teleport in, essentially single player scenarios, and I wouldn't feel much different, because going through with a group is just a necessity now, there's no joy to it. But back before Looking for Dungeon came in, there was, you really did feel obligated to the people you were running the dungeon with. You would actually make friends with them, or enemies even. But the thing is, you had to be very careful, because these were people on your servers. You would almost certainly run into them again, especially if they were a tank, because tanks were sparse on the servers. So tanks would become well known as people who you would run dungeons with. So people felt a sense that you weren't totally anonymous. Yes, you were anonymous behind the keyboard, but as a player you would be known beyond the dungeon. And people would talk with each other more, you'd have a little bit more conversation, people might talk about the dungeon beyond just the mechanics. They would talk about just, oh, that's quite a cool thing, oh, that's a nice thing, and things would be genuine challenges. And people wouldn't get annoyed in the same way they do now, because now when someone messes up in a dungeon, which doesn't happen much because it's so damn easy in the classic dungeons, there's just an instant sense of you pounce on them, you just go, oh, what did you do that for, you idiot. But before, people would at the very least attempt to rationalise the situation. I'm not going to pretend it was all rainbows and sunshine back then, but I think because you actually knew you would probably be playing with these people again, you would at least try to reconcile the situation, try and calm things down. And if someone ninja looted, you would almost always get a true amount of blame on them. They might even get banned from going to dungeons with people because they get a bad reputation, but now you can just kind of waltz off. But to be fair again, because you level up so fast nowadays, you don't even need to worry about ninja looting. And in some ways, although it is a very, very convenient tool, looking for dungeon did somewhat destroy server communities. We still have guild communities, to be fair, but within the server you just don't need to meet people and talk to people as much, especially as group quests have not only begun to disappear, but they've also pretty much become soloable. And then there is a final thing, and this is something that really is inevitable. I don't think Blizzard could have done absolutely anything to avoid this, and that is just the fact that now the game is old and they can add new features in, they can throw in new types of quests, they can throw in garrisons, but essentially we are playing the same game we were playing 10 years ago. And I think Blizzard, to be absolutely fair, have done an excellent job of keeping their game fresh, and I mean the fact it's going for so long is a testament to how good they are at keeping it fresh. But it just won't be the same as when you made your first druid. I remember very fondly, I remember my very first Tauren druid, and actually the reason I've started up a troll druid right now that you can see on screen is for nostalgia, but I remember my very first Tauren druid, and although I didn't do anything at all fantastical or amazing by today's standards, just going through Mulgore and hunting down Kodo with just some random people I met. It wasn't part of a quest, we just felt like doing it. And that's something that I definitely used to do but never do now. Because I remember me and my guildmates would just do things for the hell of it, just for the fun of it. Now people don't do anything unless there's achievement involved, unless there's something to be gained in some form. Our guild did these constant attacks on the crossroads. There was no reason for that, we had nothing to gain at all we could do was damage our armor, to be honest. But it was just kind of fun, it was just a zany thing to do. I mean, there was no reason to attack the crossroads other than to grief the horde, to be honest. But it was fun, and that kind of stuff doesn't really happen anymore. There was also, and this is a really big argument among some people, but this is just my little thing on it. There's also the thing about flying mounts. Although I do love them, I do love flying mounts. At the same time, they do make the game a little trivial in the old world, and that's kind of why I'm very grateful that they've disabled flying for now on Draenor, although I do believe it's on its way. And so because it's such a nuanced question, it's impossible to definitively say whether or not the game has gotten better or worse. I guess for an easier answer, I would say that objectively speaking, purely objectively speaking, the game has gotten better. I don't think I'd actually want to go back to vanilla WoW. If you have any thoughts or opinions on this topic, I know there are some people who are very, very enthusiastic about classic raiding because back then it was a very exclusive thing to do. Please do let me know. As always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.